Silas stood on the ridge, looking down at what remained of the hollow. The air was thick, not with the clean scent of pine, but with the heavy, bitter smell of ash and quenched dreams. Below him, where Captain Hale's settlement had stood, there was only blackness. The great fire had swept through 3 days prior, a roaring wave of judgment that left nothing behind but charcoal skeletons and baked mud. The creek, usually loud and clear, was choked silent by debris. It was a scar upon the land, raw and sudden. He saw no movement, no survivors digging through the ruin. They had taken what little they could carry and fled east, back toward the flatter lands that understood their haste. The wind moved through the blackened spars of timber, making a low, whistling sound. It was the only voice left in the valley of the Red Willow. Silas pulled his coat tighter. The late autumn chill was sharp, but the ground was still warm beneath his boots. He walked down the slope, his steps careful. This was a graveyard, and it demanded respect, even if those buried beneath the ash had shown none to the land itself. He stopped at the center of the ruin. This had been Hale's saloon, the loudest and proudest building thrown up in less than a week. It was gone in less than an hour. The iron stove, bought at great expense in St. Louis, lay on its side, rusted red by the intense heat. Glass bottles had melted into strange green puddles. There was a terrible finality to it. Silas felt a deep ache, not for the men. They had chosen their path, but for the timber. He had seen them fell the ancient pines, wasting half the wood, building flimsy walls that could never hold back a hard winter, let alone the valley's temper. He had watched them silent from his own small cabin higher up the pass. His own home, built of stone and thick-notched logs, still stood. The fire had come near, licking at the clearing he had painstakingly cut, but the wind had turned, and his stone hearth had held. His home was built to endure. Hale's camp was built to take. A shadow fell over him. Silas turned, his hand moving slowly, not toward his rifle, but to his side. He relaxed when he saw the man. It was Wapasha, an elder of the Arapaho, whose people used this valley for winter shelter long before any white man had seen the peaks. Wapasha's face was like carved granite, his eyes holding the smoke of 1,000 fires. He, too, was looking at the ruin. He carried nothing but a single eagle feather, held loosely in his left hand. He walked past Silas, toward the ruined stove. He nudged the warped metal with his moccasin. "They built a house for the wind," Wapasha said, his voice quiet. "But they did not ask the wind where it wished to blow." He looked at the black ground. "They brought loud axes, but they did not bring ears." Silas nodded. He had no words to add. The two men stood in the silence, one who had built to last, and one who understood why the others had failed. The smoke rose around them, the final ghosts of a hollow ambition. It is a quiet thing to listen to a story in the twilight. The fire settles, the stars sharpen, and the world feels older. If this tale finds you well, leave a word in the comments. Tell us what valley or city you are listening from, so we know how far the smoke of this fire has traveled. We are grateful to have you here, sharing the warmth. The trouble had begun 3 months before, with the changing of the leaves. Before then, Silas had known only the quiet rhythm of the mountains. He had spent 2 full seasons building his cabin, not on the valley floor, but high on the shoulder of the mountain where the south sun could reach it and the north wind was broken by a spine of granite. He had not built like the other trappers, who threw up lean-tos of raw hide and green logs, ready to abandon them by spring. Silas was building a home. He had come to this high country not to take, but to stay. He worked alone, using the methods his grandfather, a man from the old country, had taught him. He used no iron spikes, only hardwood pegs and precisely cut saddle notches. He dug deep, setting a foundation of heavy river stone, fitting each one by hand until they locked tight. The logs were spruce, cured for a full year, each one scribed and shaped with the adze until it sat perfectly on the one below. It was the chimney that took the most time. It was the heart of the cabin, the part that would keep the fire, and he would not hurry it. He built it wide at the base, using flat stones he hauled from the creek bed, packing them with a mortar of clay and horsehair. He built it straight and true, with a proper flue and a deep firebox. It was slow work, it was honest work. While he built, Wapasha's people would sometimes pass. The children would watch him, silent from the trees. The warriors would pause, nodding at the quality of his axe work. One day, Wapasha himself came. He did not speak. He walked the perimeter of the half-built cabin. He ran his hand over the tight-fit notches. He stood inside and looked up at the sky, judging the angle of the roof beams. Then he went to the chimney. He spent a long time there, looking at the mortar, the careful angle of the flue. He placed his hand on the cool stone. "This stone," Wapasha said his first words to Silas, "it knows the fire. It will hold it." He nodded once. "You build like the beaver. You build for your children." It was the highest praise Silas had ever received. Then Captain Hale arrived. He came not with mules, but with wagons, forcing them up the narrow game trails, cutting down trees that blocked his path. He had a charter, he claimed, to search for gold in the Red Willow. He brought 20 men, none of whom knew the mountains. They were loud men, city men, armed with repeating rifles and a deep hunger. They saw Silas's cabin and laughed. "Look at the hermit," one shouted, "building a fort." Hale, a man with a stiff back and cold eyes, rode up to Silas. "You're on my claim, trapper." Silas just looked at him. "This land claims no man, Captain. We are only guests." Hale spat. "This land is a treasury, and I have the key." They set their camp in the meadow below, the one Wapasha's people used for grazing their horses. They built fast, using green wood and thin planks. Their structures were wide, but they were not strong. They were built for profit, not for winter. Silas watched them from his ridge. He watched them divert the creek to sluice for gold, turning the clear water to mud. He watched them leave their fires unattended, and he watched the weather, which was growing drier than any season he had ever known. And the insult came not with a fist, but with a spark. It was a hot, dry afternoon in late summer. The wind had been blowing from the west for a week, a dry, rasping breath that stole the moisture from everything it touched. The pines shed their needles, carpeting the forest floor in a thick brown layer of tinder. Even the creek seemed thinner, the stones on its banks exposed and white. Silas was splitting wood, moving with a steady, cautious rhythm. He conserved his energy. He checked his water barrels. He kept his axe sharp. He had already cleared a wide break around his cabin, cutting back the brush and low-hanging limbs until only bare earth and stone surrounded his foundation. Wapasha had seen him doing it and nodded. "The fire must have no bridge," he'd said. Silas knew the danger. The mountains were waiting for a single mistake. Down in the hollow, Hale's men were making many. Their carelessness was a constant offense. They had left a cook fire untended near a pile of shavings and discarded lumber. Silas saw the first wisp of smoke, a dirty grey column rising against the clean blue of the sky. It was not the smoke of a healthy hearth. It was the smoke of trouble. He grabbed a wet burlap sack and his shovel and ran down the trail. By the time he arrived, the flames were 6 feet high, chewing on the side of their half-built stable. The men were shouting, throwing disorganized buckets of water that did little but hiss and steam. They were afraid, but their fear made them clumsy. "Back!" Silas shouted, his voice cracking through the panic. "Clear the wood from its path! Starve it!" Hale ran up, his face red. "Do as he says! You fools, move!" Together, they beat the fire back. It took an hour. The side of the stable was scorched, and a patch of forest floor was blackened, but the hollow was saved. The men were coughing, their faces smeared with soot. Hale walked over to Silas, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You move fast. For a hermit," Hale said. There was no gratitude in his voice, only a new layer of resentment. "You're lucky," Silas said, leaning on his shovel. His voice was cold. "The wind is sleeping. If it had woken up, you would have lost it all. We had it handled." Hale sneered. "Your valley captain," Silas said, gesturing to the dry pines on the ridge. "It is a box of dry powder, and you are playing with matches." He turned and walked away, leaving the men in their scorched camp. He did not look back. He returned to his cabin, to his stone and his clear ground. He did not make an oath of vengeance. He made an oath of vigilance. He would keep his word to the land, even if the others would not. He would be ready when the real fire came. He knew with a certainty that chilled him that it was only a matter of time. The journey began not with a step, but with the sky. The air grew heavier. The sun rose each morning as a dull red disk behind a veil of distant smoke. Fires were burning in the high parks to the west, and the wind, which had held its breath for so long, was beginning to shift. It was now a waiting game. Silas moved like a man preparing for a siege. He filled every barrel and bucket with water. He moved his small store of pelts and supplies into the root cellar he had dug beneath his stone floor. He rechecked the chinking between his logs, sealing any gap where an ember might find purchase. He did not work with panic, but with purpose. He was honoring the work he had done. He was honoring the warning Wapasha had given him. He felt a stillness settle over him, the quiet resolve of a man who has done all he can, and now must wait for the test. One evening, as the sky turned a sickly yellow, he saw a rider approaching. It was not one of Hale's men. The horse moved with the easy, ground-eating lope of the high country. It was Wapasha's nephew, young Red Fox. He stopped his pony just outside the clearing, respecting the boundary Silas had made. "My uncle sees the smoke," Red Fox said. He did not dismount. "He says the wind will turn tonight. It will come from the west. It will bring the fire." Silas nodded. He had felt it too. The air was electric, the pressure dropping. "Tell him I'm ready," Silas said. Red Fox looked at the cabin. He looked at the stone chimney, solid as the mountain itself. He looked at the wide, clear ground. "You have listened," Red Fox said. "Many of our people are moving east to the flatlands until the smoke clears, but my uncle and 10 warriors stay. They watch the pass at the North Ridge." This was the alliance. It was not a promise of battle. It was a statement of shared space, of mutual respect. Wapasha was not defending Silas, he was defending the valley, the same as Silas. They were, in that moment, allied against the same careless force, not Hale, but the fire Hale had invited. "I will watch the hollow," Silas said. "If they try to run, I will show them the game trail to the river." Red Fox nodded. "They have deafened the mountain. It may not listen to them now." The young warrior turned his pony and was gone, melting back into the aspen grove. Silas was alone again, but he did not feel alone. He felt anchored. He was part of a larger purpose. He was a man standing guard, not just over his own logs and stones, but over an idea that a man must live with the land, not on it. He put a fresh bucket of water by the door. He climbed onto his roof and swept the last of the pine needles off the shingles. He sat on his porch as the sun vanished, not setting, but simply being erased by the smoke. The wind, as prophesied, began to turn. It started as a whisper, then it began to howl. Datu Deishad, the fire, did not arrive quietly. It arrived with a sound like a locomotive, a freight train of pure destruction. It came over the western ridge just after midnight, not as a line of flames, but as a solid wall. The wind drove it, and the dry forest fed it. Silas stood in his clearing, the heat so intense it stung his face even from 100 yards away. He watched as entire trees exploded, turning from green to black to orange in a single second. The air was filled with a blizzard of red embers, swirling like angry stars. The sky was brighter than day. He saw Hale's camp down in the hollow, suddenly illuminated. He saw men running, shouting, their voices lost in the roar. They were trapped. The fire was moving faster than a horse could run. Silas ran to the back of his cabin, where his water barrels stood. He soaked the burlap sacks, his hands shaking, not from fear, but from the terrible, awesome power of the blaze. He ran to the walls of his cabin, beating out the small embers that landed on the logs. The wood was seasoned, and the gaps were sealed. The embers mostly hissed and died. Then a massive gust of wind drove a river of fire directly into the hollow. The flimsy, pine-sap buildings of Hale's settlement vanished. They did not burn, they detonated. The saloon, the bunkhouse, the assay office, all gone in a flash of white-hot light. The sound of it, a great whoosh, was sucked away by the main fire's roar. The reckoning was not delivered by a man, it was delivered by the wind. His own cabin was in peril. The roof was steaming. An ember had caught in the corner of the eaves. Silas scrambled up the ladder he had built, carrying a bucket. The heat was immense. He threw the water and the small fire died with a gasp. He stayed on the roof, a small, solitary figure against a backdrop of inferno. He was not fighting the fire, he was surviving it. He was a stone in the middle of a raging river. His cabin, built with patience and respect, was holding. The fire, seeing this small fortress of stone and cleared earth, split. It flowed around his clearing, a terrible wave finding the path of least resistance. It roared past him and down into the lower valley, leaving his small island of survival intact, scorched but standing. As the main fire passed, he saw figures stumbling out of the smoke. It was Hale and 3 of his men, their clothes smoking, their faces black. They had fled to the creek, lying in the mud. They saw Silas standing on his roof, and they simply stared. Their arrogance burned away, leaving only raw, desperate confusion. They had built for profit, and the fire had cashed them out. And the dawn broke over a landscape transformed. The world was grey and black. The smoke was so thick, the sun was only a suggestion. Silas climbed down from the roof, his body aching, his throat raw. His cabin stood. The stone chimney was black with soot. The logs were scorched, but it was whole. It had held. The fire had passed, leaving only smouldering stumps and the silence of absolute destruction. He walked to the edge of his clearing. The forest floor was gone, burned down to the mineral soil. The air smelled of burnt earth and deep loss. He saw Hale and his men huddled by the creek. They were broken. They had lost everything, their wagons, their tools, their gold, their pride. They looked up as Silas approached, and there was no fight left in their eyes. Later that morning, as the smoke began to lift, Wapasha appeared. He walked not from the trail, but through the burned forest, his moccasins silent on the ash. He was followed by his warriors. They were untouched. They had stayed on the high ridges, above the smoke, in the bare rock, where the fire could not climb. Wapasha walked past Hale without a word. He walked straight to Silas's cabin. He placed his hand on the warm stone of the chimney. He looked at the tight-fit logs, scorched but not breached. He looked at the cleared ground around the foundation. Then he turned and looked down at the hollow, where the flimsy settlement had been erased. "You built a home," Wapasha said, his voice carrying in the quiet air. He pointed to the ashes of the saloon. "They built a trap." Hale, humbled, finally stood up. He walked toward the 2 men, his steps unsteady. "We didn't know," Hale whispered. We didn't listen." Wapasha looked at the captain, his gaze unwavering. "The mountain spoke every day. You did not have the ears to hear it. You brought the habits of a soft land to a hard one. This land does not forgive." He turned back to Silas. "The fire chief," he said, tapping his own chest, "is the wind, but the stone is the fire's teacher." He looked at Silas's cabin again, then back at the ruin. He gave his judgment. "Your house," he said to Silas, "is a strong house. It is built with respect. It is safer than the houses of men who build with greed." The lesson was complete. The fire had taken what was weak, and it had proven what was strong. It was not a victory. It was an understanding. In the weeks that followed, the valley began its slow, quiet breathing. The first rains came, washing the ash into the soil, turning the black hills a strange, deep purple. Hale and his men, given provisions by Silas and horses by Wapasha's people, left. They rode east, disappearing over the pass, and they never returned. They left the mountains to those who understood them. Silas remained. He did not celebrate. He began the work of healing. He cleared the choked creek, allowing the water to run clear again. He salvaged what iron he could from the ruin, tools to be remade, not to be wasted. He walked the burned forest, seeing the first tentative green shoots of new life already pushing through the black. His cabin was more than a home now. It was a marker. It was a promise kept. The Arapaho would sometimes stop by, sharing tobacco or smoked meat, sitting by his hearth. They called him Beaver's brother, the man who built with stone and wisdom. He had been tested by the fire, and he had endured. He had learned the mountain's greatest lesson. True safety is not found in high walls or fast rifles. It is not found in new ideas or hasty ambition. True safety is found in humility. It is found in listening to the old ways, to the lessons of the stone, the wind, and the water. It is found in building things that are meant to last, things that honor the ground they stand on. The strongest shelter is not built against the wilderness. It is built with it. If you enjoyed this story, stay a while longer by the fire. There are more tales from the high country, where honor rides the wind.